Hi guys! So we are going to continue talking about series readers. We have been doing a lot of work to become experts on our series characters. So far we've collected information about the main characters, we've paid attention to how they respond to problems, we've noticed things that are the same across different books in a series. We've thought about why characters are doing the things that they're doing, and today we are going to use what we know to guess what our characters will do next. So far we've studied a few characters. We've studied Scaredy Squirrel, we've studied Pete the Cat, and this week we are going to go back to two characters that we already know a little bit about, and those characters are Frog and Toad. So we've read quite a few Frog and Toad stories already, so we already have some knowledge about Frog and Toad, and we know that they're two different characters that like different things. So Frog and Toad. So we know that Toad, when we read the story about the kite, we know that Toad gives up easily. And we know that Frog likes to encourage Toad. He didn't let Toad give up in that story. We know that Toad is kind of lazy because there is that story where he refused to get out of bed and to clean anything. And then Frog sort of made him. So Frog, again, he helped Toad do what he was supposed to do. So these are the things that we already know about Frog and Toad because we've already read some Frog and Toad books. And we're going to use what we know, and we're going to collect a little bit more information about them. And then we're going to try to predict what they would do in different scenarios. Okay? So let's read a little bit of Frog and Toad, and then we'll go back and we'll think about how each of these characters would react in different situations. So this is Frog and Toad Together by Arnold Lobel. And you can see that there are quite a few different stories in here, but we're going to skip to the end and we are going to read this one called The Dream. Toad was asleep and he was having a dream. He was on a stage and he was wearing a costume. Toad looked out into the dark. Frog was sitting in the theater. A strange voice from far away said, "Presenting the greatest Toad in all the world." Toad took a deep bow. Frog looked smaller as he shouted, "Hooray for Toad!" "Toad will now play the piano very well," said the strange voice. Toad played the piano and he did not miss a note. "Frog!" cried Toad, "can you play the piano like this?" "No," said Frog, and it seemed to Toad that Frog looked even smaller. Interesting. So right here I'm seeing that Toad is kind of being a little braggy. He's asking Frog if he can play the piano, even though I think he probably knows that he can't. So I'm going to say that Toad is kind of being braggy. He's being full of himself. "Toad will now walk on a high wire, and he will not fall down," said the voice. Toad walked on the high wire. "Frog!" cried Toad, "can you do tricks like this?" "No," peeped Frog, who looked very, very small. Oh no, so I see that the more Toad is doing, the more braggy and rude Toad is being, the smaller Frog is getting. So it seems like Frog really doesn't like it. I don't think it's making Frog feel very good, even though it's just a dream. "Toad will now dance and he will be wonderful," said the voice. "Frog, can you be as wonderful as this?" said Toad, as he danced all over the stage. There was no answer. Toad looked out into the theater. Frog was so small that he could not be seen or heard. "Frog," said Toad, "where are you?" There was still no answer. "Frog, what have I done?" cried Toad. Then the voice said, "The greatest Toad will now—" "Shut up!" screamed Toad. "Frog, Frog, where have you gone?" Toad was spinning in the dark. "Come back, Frog, I will be lonely." So, even though he was bragging and making Frog not feel very good, Toad really does love Frog, right? They're best friends, and he's scared to lose Frog. He's scared that Frog is going to go away. "I am right here," said Frog. Frog was standing near Toad's bed. "Wake up, Toad," he said. "Frog, is that really you?" said Toad. "Of course it is me," said Frog. "And are you your own right size?" asked Toad. "Yes, I think so," said Frog. Toad looked out at the sunshine coming through the window. "Frog," he said, "I am so glad that you came over." "I always do," said Frog. Then Frog and Toad ate a big breakfast, and after that they spent a fine long day together. So we learned that Frog always comes over to Toad, and even though he wasn't, it was just a dream and it wasn't real, we know that Frog will always be there for Toad. Okay, so no matter what, he's always going to be there and they're always going to be friends. So, this is what we know about our characters, and using what we've learned, we can make a prediction about how Frog and Toad would react in different situations. So, let's pretend that Frog and Toad are hanging out at Toad's house, and all of a sudden a big hot air balloon comes into the forest. You know what a hot air balloon is? It's got a basket, and you can float up in it into the sky on a hot air balloon ride. And what if all get to go ride in it, but in order to ride in it, they have to wake up really early and they have to do a bunch of stuff in order to prepare. Let's say, how do we think that Frog would react and how do we think that Toad would react? Because I think it would be different. I think that since we know Toad is lazy and he kind of gives up easily, I think Toad would really not want to do it. He would be really excited about it, but then he'd be like, "You mean I have to get up early? I have to get up before the sun is up?" And I don't think Toad would want to. But I think that Frog, because we know that he's encouraging and he helps Toad, I think that Frog would convince Toad that it's worth it, and I think eventually they would go. Okay? So we can use what we know about our characters to decide how they would react in different scenarios, in different situations. And we can even, because we've studied a few different characters, we can also think about how Scaredy Squirrel would react. So let's say that a hot air balloon comes to Scaredy Squirrel's tree. How do we think Scaredy Squirrel is going to react? Well, we know he's scared. We know he's prepared for an emergency. And he gets a little braver in his books, but not that much. So I'm thinking Scaredy Squirrel is probably going to hide or he's going to run away. He's definitely not going to want to go in the hot air balloon, right? He's probably going to try and, I don't know, he's going to go somewhere else and try and find help. But we know that Pete the cat is brave and likes adventure. So if Pete found a hot air balloon, Pete would probably go in the hot air balloon, right? He would want to ride it because he likes going on adventures. So all of these characters would act differently depending on the kind of character they are. So what you guys are going to do after this is there's going to be a few different scenarios, a few different situations, and you're going to have to tell me how do you think each character would react. So how do you think Scaredy Squirrel would react? How do you think Pete the Cat would react? How do you think Frog and Toad would react? Okay? And then this week you can read whatever book it is that you would like to read. It can be, I'm going to send you guys a Frog and Toad book. There's a Frog and Toad book on Epic, so you could read that if you want to. You could read more Pete the Cat, you could read more Scaredy Squirrel, or you could read any other book that you want to read. But I want you to think about how you can predict what your character is going to do in your book. So you can say to yourself, what will my character do next? So you guys are going to read your book, think about your predictions, and then you're going to come back and make sure you fill out that reading log as usual. A couple of you guys, I think, forgot to do that last week. Just make sure that you come back and fill it out so I know what you've read. All right, guys, go ahead and get started on making your predictions.